Is airborne transmission of COVID-19 a risk factor? Recently, there has been a lot of ambiguity between the World Health Organization and the different scientists around the world saying that this virus is airborne. In this video, we'll be discussing the factors and how this ambiguity had led to a result. And also, we'll be discussing what are aerosols. Please stick to the video. Before I begin, I am Prashanth. I welcome you all to Wifi Study Karo. If you are first to my channel, I request you all to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you will be getting notified every time when I upload a video. So in a letter, what scientists have told the World Health Organization, on July 6, around 239 scientists from 32 countries put their signatures on an open letter that said COVID-19 is also transmitted via aerosols. Title: It is a time to address the airborne transmission of COVID-19. And addressed the World Health Organization, they said that there was enough evidence to show that the virus are released during exhalation, talking and coughing as micro droplets small enough to remain aloft and pose a risk of exposure at a distance beyond 1 to 2 meters from someone who is infected, over 3 feet, 6 feet, recommended by physical distancing between the people to avoid transmission. So what do the scientists believe is that the scientists led by Lydia Morawska of the International Laboratory of Air Quality and Health, World Health Organization Collaborating Center, Queensland University of Technology, Australia, appealed that the medical community and the relevant national and international bodies to recognize the potential for airborne spread of COVID-19. There is significant potential for inhalation exposure to virus in microscopic respiratory droplets, that is micro droplets, at short to medium distances up to several meters or room scale, and we are advocating for the use of preventive measures to mitigate this route of airborne transmission. The letter came at the time when the most public health organizations, including World Health Organization, do not recognize airborne transmission except for aerosol generating procedures performed in healthcare setting. Responding to the letters in Oxford Academic Clinical Infectious Diseases, Dr. Aligarnazi, who's WHO's technical lead for infection prevention and control, was cited in the media reports saying that there was evidence emerging of airborne transmission of coronavirus, but that was not definitive. She went on to say that the possibility of airborne transmission in public setting, especially in very specified conditions, crowded, closed, poorly ventilated settings that have been described, cannot be ruled out. She also added, however, the evidence need to be gathered and interpreted, and we can continue this support for this. So what are aerosols? How different are they from the respiratory droplets? In a common understanding, aerosols are minute particles that are expelled under the pressure, as in the case of fine mist from the jar of perfume or a can of roach repellent. However, aerosol is a term used to broadly refer to particles suspended in air. They could include fine dust, mist or smoke. In the context of transmission of viruses, as in this case, aerosol are read as micro droplets, much smaller as 5 microns or lesser than the respiratory droplets, and take a longer time to drop to the floor. They will be expelled by the people breathing, laughing or singing, as against respiratory droplets through the expel, which forcefully acts such as sneezing or coughing. As per the open letter, a typical indoor air velocities, a 5 micron droplet will travel 10 of meters, much greater than a scale of typical room, while setting from the height of around 1.5 meters to the floor. As they remain suspended in the air for the long time, an individual who is COVID-19 positive is likely to infect people standing even at a distance of 1 to 2 meters in small poorly ventilated room. This poses the risk that the people sharing such environments can potentially inhale these viruses, resulting in infection and disease, the signatories endorsed. The respiratory droplets transmit COVID-19 infection has dominated the discourse from nearly the beginning of the epidemic and has guided the path that interventions have taken thus far, including wearing masks, keeping distance, and hand washing routines. But is there any evidence to prove that aerosols transmit SARS-CoV-2? In its response, WHO did say that there was a need to watch the area of public exposure to aerosols causing the infection, but insisted that the evidence was not yet entirely compelling except in a healthcare setting where aerosol emission is common. The bar of proof has been set high for aerosol transmission. Even the scientific reluctance to accept that theory has been couched in belief that it would trigger widespread panic in the community. A Reuters report cited by Jose, a chemist at the University of Colorado, who signed a paper trying to explain the historical reluctance to accept the notion of aerosol transmission, says that if people heart or hear airborne, healthcare workers will refuse. People hear airborne, healthcare workers will refuse to go to hospital. He also said that other people will buy up all highly protective N95 respiratory masks, and there will be none left for developing countries. But does this open letter to the World Health Organization present enough proof? It also says that airborne transmission appears to be only plausible explanation for several super spreading events investigated which occurred under such conditions, and others where recommended precautions related to direct droplet transmissions were followed. Further, the letter says that it is understood that there is not as yet universal acceptance for the airborne transmission of SARS-CoV-2, but in our collective statements or assessments, there is a precautionary principle. There is more than enough supporting evidence so that the precautionary principle should apply. In order to control the pandemic, pending the availability of vaccine, all routes of transmission must be interpreted or interrupted. The signatories agreed that the evidence is admittedly incomplete for all the steps in COVID-19 micro-droplet transmission, but pointed out that the similarly incomplete for the large droplet and fomite modes of transmission. Further, they advanced the point of the view that airborne transmission mechanism operates in parallel with a large droplet and fomite routes. That now they are the basis for the guidance. They relied heavily on several retrospective studies conducted after the SARS-CoV-1 epidemic, demonstrating that the airborne transmission was the most likely mechanism explaining the spatial pattern of infections. Retrospective analyses have also shown the same for the SARS-CoV-2. The letter also said this way. In particular, a study in their review of records from Chinese restaurant observed no evidence direct or indirect contact between the three parties. In the review of video records from the restaurant, they also observed no evidence of direct or indirect contact between the three parties. Earlier, a letter in the New England Journal of Medicine titled Aerosol and Surface Stability of SARS-CoV-2 as compared with SARS-CoV-1 suggested that SARS-CoV-2 remained viable in aerosols for up to 3 hours, but the generation was done via a high-powered machine that is unlikely to be replicated in the real-life situations. The signatories of this letter said that many studies conducted on the spread of other viruses, including respiratory syncytial virus, that is RSV, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, and influenza, show that the viable airborne viruses could be exhaled or detected in the indoor environment of infected patients. This poses the risk that people sharing such environment can potentially inhale these viruses, resulting in infection of the diseases. There is also every reason to expect the SARS-CoV-2 behaves similarly, and that transmission via airborne microdroplets in an important pathway. Here is one of the retired professor of clinical virology. The airborne aerosol transmission theory is rather hyped up, and in his opinion, and yet he says that in closed spaces without ventilation, where the people tend to crowd around, one must take precautions, wearing the mask at all times, even indoors if others are present in the circumstances as described in the open letter would be recommended, as he adds. So what's the future? As the WHO waits for more robust evidence on the principle of aerosol transmission, the authors are pushing only to address every possible pathway to slow down the transmission of COVID-19, providing sufficient and effective ventilation as far as possible in public buildings, schools and hospitals, avoiding overcrowding in public buildings, and transportation systems are recommended. Besides, supplementing general ventilation with airborne infection control such as local exhaust, high efficiency air filtration, and germicidal ultraviolet lights. The author, recommending a zero tolerance approach to COVID-19 transmission, adds that the measures they propose offer more benefits than potential downsides, even if they can be partially implemented. So these are the studies which show that airborne viruses can be exhaled in the environment of infected patients. There is every reason to expect that SARS-CoV-2 behaves similarly, and that the transmission via airborne micro droplets is likely, according to the scientist. So this is regarding the airborne spread of COVID-19 is a risk factor and everyone should take the precautions, but yet the studies have not concluded that this is airborne disease, but there is a close need to follow the precautions. That's the end of discussion of this particular article. If you want to see more articles like this, please do subscribe. This is my channel Wifi Study Karo. You can also follow me on Instagram, and this is my Facebook page Wifi Study Karo, where I do editorials daily and some of the interesting facts, job updates, technical glitches. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.